The trajectory of every extraordinary, industry-defining career or creative project is ultimately decided by how an individual navigates a brutal, highly predictable wall of friction that surfaces long after the initial excitement of a new beginning has completely evaporated. In a hyper-competitive global economy, regular people are systematically raised on a dangerous, unexamined cultural cliché, the comforting, simplistic mantra that quitters never win and winners never quit. In his brilliant, highly surgical strategic masterpiece, The Dip, a little book that teaches you when to quit and when to stick, author and marketing visionary Seth Godin completely demolishes this conventional wisdom, presenting a radical, counterintuitive thesis. Extraordinary success belongs exclusively to those who master the calculated, aggressive art of quitting the wrong things at the right time, so they can channel the absolute entirety of their finite resources into surviving the one right struggle. Godin exposes the devastating economic and psychological costs of strategic blindness, which forces ambitious individuals to waste their precious lifetime compounding capital grinding away in dead-end traps, leaving them completely bankrupt of the energy required to become world-class where it actually matters. To understand why the blanket cultural prohibition against quitting is a recipe for permanent mediocrity, we must isolate the structural architecture of the three distinct curves Godin uses to categorize every professional, creative, and institutional endeavor: the dip, the cul-de-sac, and the cliff. The first and most important curve is the dip, the long, grueling, and agonizing stretch of hardship that separates a beginner's early, easy successes from the ultimate prize of true world-class mastery. When you launch a brand new YouTube channel, start writing a massive 80,000-word manuscript, or pick up a highly complex programming language like C#, the initial phase is incredibly fun, highly novel, and emotionally rewarding. You experience quick wins, your learning curve feels vertical, and you receive immediate bursts of validation from your environment. Then, within a few weeks or months, the novelty completely wears off. The technical hurdles grow exponentially steeper, the algorithmic feedback turns cold, and the actual labor transitions into a monotonous, frustrating, and exhausting grind. This is the dip. Godin forces us to realize that the dip is not an accidental system glitch, a tragic misfortune, or a sign that you have failed. The dip is a deliberate, highly efficient structural barrier designed by the market to keep regular people out. It is a filtering mechanism that creates artificial scarcity, ensuring that the few individuals who possess the strategic clarity and emotional resilience to survive the meat grinder emerge on the other side with immense leverage, commanding premium royalties, absolute creative sovereignty, and zero serious competition because the market has ruthlessly liquidated everyone else. This high-value barrier stands in stark, dangerous contrast to the second curve, which Godin labels the cul-de-sac, a French phrase that literally translates to a dead-end street. The cul-de-sac is a treacherous psychological trap because it is an environment where you work incredibly hard, pour in endless hours of deliberate practice, and execute your tasks with flawless consistency, yet absolutely nothing changes. Your trajectory remains completely flat, horizontal, and unmoving. You are not failing spectacularly enough to trigger an emergency alarm, but you are not growing. Scales are not tipping, and you are not moving 1 inch closer to achieving true, industry-defining dominance. The human brain, driven by an ancient evolutionary aversion to admitting defeat, easily misinterprets this dead-end stagnation as a sign of noble perseverance, telling itself a self-defeating narrative that if it just grinds a little harder for another year, things will magically pivot. Godin issues an uncompromising, data-driven warning: staying in a cul-de-sac is a form of passive, slow-motion professional suicide. Every single ounce of your finite cognitive capital, emotional energy, and time spent staying in a dead-end project is capital that is actively being stolen from your true purpose, ensuring that you remain permanently mediocre across the board. Equally catastrophic is the third curve, known as the cliff, a deceptive, highly volatile structure that looks like an unbroken upward surge of profit, status, or validation right up until the exact microsecond it completely falls off into total structural ruin. The classic textbook example of a cliff is an unhealthy, high-risk addiction or a business model that relies entirely on exploiting a temporary, highly unstable legal loophole or algorithmic exploit. You experience massive, intoxicating short-term rewards, and everything feels spectacularly successful. But you are operating on a fragile platform that is mathematically guaranteed to collapse the moment the external environment shifts. The deeper you slide down a cliff, the harder it becomes to execute a strategic pivot, because the system is engineered to keep you hooked on the immediate dopamine hits right until the platform shatters underneath your feet. An emotionally intelligent strategist learns to spot a cliff or a cul-de-sac from a mile away, possessing the cold, clinical detachment to quit them immediately, ruthlessly, and without a single drop of moral shame, preserving their precious life force for the one authentic dip that can actually transform their destiny. This strategic choice requires a profound, realistic mastery of a harsh economic reality that Godin terms the premium of being number one. In a modern, globalized digital culture, overflowing with infinite choices and hyper-saturated markets, the rewards of success are not distributed along a smooth, linear meritocracy scale. Instead, the rewards are heavily skewed by a brutal power law distribution, where the absolute top performer in a specific niche captures an overwhelming, monopolistic majority of the financial returns, consumer attention, and systemic leverage. The person who is the number one bookbinder, the number one cozy mystery audiobook channel, or the number one technical troubleshooter doesn't just make a little bit more than the person who is ranked number 10. They make 10, 50, or 100 times more, while the rest of the field is left to fight over the microscopic crumbs of the remaining market share. This happens because human beings are biologically optimized to seek out the best. When we are looking for a professional to fix our problem or a piece of content to consume, we do not want to waste our scarce time on average quality. If you choose to enter a market where you have zero realistic intention, capability, or passion to endure the necessary dip required to become number one in your specific, tightly defined niche, then entering that market is an absolute waste of your life. Being average in a crowded space is a financially bankrupt and psychologically draining position. It means you endure all the pain of the grind without ever capturing the compounding rewards of the summit. To operationalize these insights and systematically guide your creative workflow through the fire of the dip, an individual must completely separate the act of quitting from the emotional state of panic. The fatal error made by the vast majority of regular, reactionary market participants is that they quit exclusively when they are in a state of high emotional distress, hypervigilance, and absolute exhaustion. When the metrics drop, the criticism hits, or the workload becomes overwhelming, their primitive amygdala hijacks their executive brain, screaming that they must flee the discomfort immediately to protect their sanity. Quitting in the absolute depth of the struggle, when you are standing face to face with the hardest part of the dip, is a catastrophic behavioral failure. It means you have already paid the entire, immense psychological price of admission without staying around long enough to reap a single dime of the long-term rewards. Godin introduces a strict, non-negotiable protocol to break this loop. You are completely forbidden from ever quitting a project while you are in the middle of a panic. If you want to quit, You must possess the discipline to map out your exit strategy long before the crisis arrives, writing down an explicit, objective set of boundaries and metric conditions under which you will walk away. By designing your quitting constraints in a calm, clear pre-commitment framework, you take the burden off your finite willpower, outsmarting your emotional reactivity and ensuring that you stick through the painful parts of a legitimate dip while cleanly cutting away the dead-end traps before they consume your lifespan. This disciplined approach achieves its ultimate leverage when applied directly to the execution of a multi-chapter creative production or an independent business campaign. Before you ever dare to press launch on a brand new channel, outline a novel, or implement a complex software system, you must conduct an honest, unflinching internal interrogation consisting of two simple, high-stakes questions. First, is the specific obstacle I am about to face a finite structural dip that will eventually taper off into a massive competitive advantage, or is it a permanent, unmoving cul-de-sac? Second, do I currently possess the compounding capital, the emotional resilience, the structural focus, and the raw resources required to pay the absolute tax of this dip until I break through to the top? If the answer to either of these questions is an honest no, you must have the courage to walk away from the project immediately, before you waste a single hour of your precious life executing a strategy destined for safe mediocrity. If the answer is a definitive yes, then you must make an unshakable, sovereign vow to your future self. You must promise that you will lean directly into the friction, welcoming the absolute worst of the grind with open arms, and treating the intense pain of the dip as a beautiful, definitive sign that your barrier to entry is working perfectly. You stop looking at the daily fluctuations of external validation as a terrifying metric of your self-worth, recognizing instead that every competitor who folds when the going gets tough is actively elevating your terminal value, clearing the field so you can claim the dominance you actually deserve. Ultimately, the dip is an urgent, deeply empowering strategic manifesto that demands a total revolution in how we value human effort and construct our long-term goals. It forcefully strips away the toxic institutional myths of mindless perseverance, reminding us that true genius belongs not to the person who blindly grinds at everything until they collapse from chronic burnout, but to the individual who knows how to be spectacularly, ruthlessly selective. The journey to an extraordinary life of creative autonomy, professional legacy, and profound financial independence does not require an external miracle or a flawless alignment of pristine circumstances. It simply requires you to look at your daily choices with absolute, clinical honesty, to drop the exhausting psychological weight of dead-end projects that do not serve your highest values, and to channel the entirety of your focus into mastering the one true struggle that matters to your destiny. By choosing strategic quitting over safe compliance, razor-sharp niche dominance over broad mediocrity, and ironclad pre-commitments over last-minute emotional panic, you break the chains of behavioral stagnation forever. The next time you find yourself standing at a frustrating professional crossroads, exhausted by a mounting wall of friction, pause, evaluate the architecture of your curve, look straight into the heart of the challenge, and outsmart the system to build the magnificent future you were born to command.